The harsh sound of metal echoed in the bright, sterile hangar. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed with a cold, even intensity. Suddenly, the multi-million-dollar MH-92 helicopter roared to life, not with a sputter, but a smooth, seamless purr, like the sound of clean wind. The engineers froze, stunned. They all knew the rotor was jammed. No one had signed off on the repair. Who did this? Catherine Vale, the sharp-eyed CEO of Vale Aero, stepped out from the observation deck. Her voice, usually calm, was now sharp with authority. Silence met her question. From a corner, a little girl with curly hair, wearing a worn cotton dress, timidly raised her hand. The hangar staff chuckled under their breath. "Who is your dad, sweetie?" The girl pursed her lips, her clear eyes unwavering. "He's the janitor." The faint laughter died instantly. Down the main aisle, a man stood with a mop, his uniform stained with oil, looking at the massive machine with the quiet reverence of someone who understood every bolt. Daniel Brooks was 38 years old. Now he was just D. Brooks, a janitor in the vast, humming hangars of Vale Aero in Dallas. His current job title belied a distinguished past, a former military aviation mechanic and chief engineer. He had served 12 years in the Air Force, specializing in tactical aircraft engine systems. He didn't just fix jets, he knew their heartbeat. He held multiple certifications that Vale Aero's entire technical staff combined couldn't match, particularly in cryogenic fuel regulation and redundancy bypass protocols. But service ended abruptly. A critical system failure led to a tragic accident, costing the life of his closest teammate. Daniel blamed the faulty sensor and himself for not catching it. The guilt was a heavy physical cloak. He sought early discharge, trading his wrench for a mop, his expertise for anonymity. He moved home to raise his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. Her mother had passed away young. Daniel taught Sophie to draw, told her simple stories about the sky, and preached humility. "You don't need to fly, Soph," he often said softly. "You just need to know how to look up. The highest honor is quiet competence." Vale Aero was where he sought refuge. It was a cleaner's job, keeping him close to the one thing he still loved, the machines of flight. He never spoke of his engineering past. His uniform bore only his last name, and his only visible history was the wear on his boots. He found a strange kind of peace in the predictable labor, scrubbing away the dirt left by others, metaphorically trying to clean the smudge of his own past failure. He was invisible. He liked it that way. One morning after the overnight inspection team left, Daniel was mopping the glossy floor near the technical bay. Sophie, quietly playing with her bright red building blocks, was nearby, constructing an improbably tall tower. The new MH-92, a recent multi-million-dollar acquisition, sat idle. Its oil valve was stubbornly jammed. The lead engineer, frustrated, had signed off on it as non-operational, citing a required week-long parts order delay. They were relying on manufacturer specs that didn't account for the regional Dallas humidity variance affecting the high-tolerance seals. Daniel observed their departure, recognizing the failure. Their sophisticated diagnostic tools were blinding them to a simple mechanical truth. A microscopic particle of debris, coupled with thermal expansion, had caused a micro-jam in the hydraulic actuator's sensor feedback loop. The team saw a systemic failure requiring a full replacement. Daniel saw a single point of human error. A maintenance checklist box missed weeks ago. Daniel stayed late after his shift. He pulled on a set of disposable gloves. The hangar was silent, save for the distant ventilation system. He didn't use a manual, he simply removed the inspection panel. The MH-92 was a civilian version of a design he knew intimately. Using a single worn wrench and his ingrained sense of calibration, he made a minute adjustment to the pressure valve. It was a small, crucial twist, a habit from his military days when lives depended on instinct. The correct torque on the calibration screw was all it needed to clear the debris and reset the sensor. The Van Gogh of mechanics. He didn't leave a note. He didn't sign the log. He meticulously wiped every smudge of oil, cleaned the panel, and put his tools away. He took a strange pride in leaving no trace. Ensuring the machine's safety was his only reward. It was a gift to the machine, an act of silent worship for something he used to love. He saw it only as work I once loved. The next morning, Catherine Vale arrived for the test flight. The plane started perfectly. It performed flawlessly. She was livid. She demanded to know who took such a huge risk, bypassing all protocol. She suspected a desperate engineer had gambled. Her career was built on control. This unsanctioned repair was chaos. And then, the quiet, childish voice. My dad did it. The entire hangar went silent. All eyes fell to the back corner, where Daniel Brooks, the janitor, stood. He was perfectly calm, perfectly still. The only sign of the true savior, a very old, deeply scarred wrench he had forgotten on the testing bench. Engraved crudely into its metal was the inscription, "For Flight 214." A quiet, heavy memory of the teammate he couldn't save. The incident was unavoidable. Daniel was summoned to Catherine's penthouse office, a space built on glass and steel that overlooked the entire runway. The office was minimalist, reflecting her belief in efficiency over comfort. When he walked in, he didn't fidget. He looked at her not as his CEO, but as another pilot's daughter. She didn't start with praise. Her voice was ice. Mr. Brooks, do you have any idea of the monetary value of that helicopter? And the legal liability you just exposed this company to? He met her gaze, his reply steady. Its monetary value is secondary, Ms. Vale. The value of a human life is higher, and legal liability is secondary to a functional aircraft. His answer made her pause. The ice around her heart cracked just a little. His calm authority was unnerving. Catherine was a young CEO. She had inherited Vale Aero from her father, a celebrated test pilot who had died in a fiery crash involving one of the company's own prototype aircraft. The tragedy was still a gaping wound in the company's history. Loss was her inheritance. Fear was her shadow. She had built her entire professional life on the conviction that only cold, hard data and perfect formulas could save lives. She feared emotional intervention in engineering. She believed feelings were the enemy of technical perfection. The unauthorized genius of Daniel threatened her entire worldview. She ordered Daniel to present his repair methodology. He didn't use a computer. He took a legal pad and wrote a meticulous, multi-step handwritten diagnosis. He cited fluid dynamics, pressure tolerances, and metallurgy. He didn't look anything up. Not a single variable was wrong. His handwriting was precise, almost calligraphic, the signature of a disciplined mind. Catherine, a former engineer herself, checked his notes. Her initial skepticism turned to astonishment. She immediately tasked her senior team to cross-reference his findings, expecting the janitor's fix to be a fluke. They ran multiple simulations, calculating the stress points. Instead, Daniel's nonlinear pressure curve adjustments and proprietary torque calculations proved to be genius, instantly solving the feedback loop issue in a way the manufacturer's rigid protocol missed. The team was speechless. This was not repair tech work. The depth of the knowledge, the highly specialized data, this was the training of a top-tier military aviation command engineer. He wasn't fixing a part. He was recalibrating the machine's soul. Daniel simply leaned back in his chair. I used to work close to the sky, he admitted, his eyes distant. Then I lost a friend up there. That was enough. My friend was the pilot of Flight 214. We were in a high-risk extraction, and a flaw that was supposed to be impossible happened. It cost a life. I haven't flown since. Catherine felt a sudden, fierce connection. She pushed a framed photograph across her vast desk. It was her father, young and proud in his Air Force uniform, standing beside an older generation MH-92. Do you know why that machine is so important to me, Mr. Brooks? He shook his head gently. My father died because of a similar engine flaw, she whispered. The memory was sharp, the loss still raw. That crash, that failure, it taught me that nothing is safe. I took over the company. I swore I would never let that happen again. I swear by my life that only perfect engineering leaves the hangar. Your wrench bypassed 5 layers of paperwork and protocol designed to protect us. And your paperwork, Daniel countered softly, failed to fix the problem for a week. Sometimes a loving hand is safer than a hesitant manual. Their eyes met, 2 souls bonded by tragic pasts, deep loss, and a shared view of engineering as a sacred, life-giving religion. They were both trapped in the same cycle of grief and control. Catherine controlled the company to control the risk. Daniel controlled his exposure to control his guilt. From that day, Catherine watched him. She saw Daniel consistently teaching Sophie to bring snacks to the night guard. She noticed him silently repairing a broken latch on the tool crib or a noisy valve in the cooling system, never asking for credit. He never sought attention, only safety. He was a moral compass in a sterile corporate environment. One evening, Catherine was working late. She descended to the hangar floor after midnight. There he was, Daniel Brooks, janitor. He was not cleaning. He was performing a silent, unauthorized quality control check on the new aircraft. He was checking the landing gear struts, testing the tension. He was taking notes in pencil, not on a log sheet, but on a crumpled paper napkin. "You are not authorized to be here after hours, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice softer than usual. He didn't flinch. He just looked up, his expression earnest. "I just wanted to be sure it was safe, Ms. Vale. Absolutely sure. The ground team relies on this. They deserve to know every millimeter is sound." Catherine said nothing. She looked at his oil-stained hands, the hands that saved a $20 million machine and perhaps the lives of those who would fly it. She finally understood. His work wasn't about the money or the title. It was a form of atonement, a sacred duty to the machine and the crew. From then on, their relationship changed. She began inviting him into her confidence, seeking his hidden technical support. No contract, no title, just an unspoken, fundamental trust. She started calling him my shadow mechanic. The final sign of the truth, the napkin, still sat on the shelf where Daniel left it. Written in pencil, next to the chemical formula for a sealant, was a simple, profound truth. Everything can fly if we are careful enough to love it. The silence didn't last. The rumor spread through the industry, thin but corrosive. A janitor fixed the multi-million-dollar helicopter. The Vale Aero Board of Directors saw it as a profound embarrassment. They convened, stiff and righteous. They demanded Catherine fire Daniel Brooks. Allowing common labor to touch a multi-million-dollar machine is an insult to the engineering elite, the lead director, Mr. Thorne, declared, his face rigid with corporate disdain. The boardroom was frigid, filled with the scent of old money and fear of instability. The directors argued that Brooks was a liability for shareholder confidence, not a hero. They saw the optics, a CEO trusting a cleaner over her salaried engineers. Their calculation was cold. A 30% stock drop was worth more than Daniel's integrity. Catherine fought back initially. His intervention saved the helicopter and bypassed a week of downtime. He showed our protocols are rigid, not resilient. Her defense fell on deaf ears. They saw her passion as a weakness, a sign of her slipping control. Catherine hesitated. She had reviewed Daniel's full military file. He was not just a mechanic. He was a decorated Air Force chief of flightline engineering, awarded a medal for 214 hours of continuous life-saving rescue work during a hostile zone evacuation. He was the embodiment of the competence they lacked. She knew firing him would be an act of betrayal against her own conscience and her father's legacy, but Daniel refused to be defended. He came to her office, hat in hand. "Thank you, Ms. Vale, but I only want to keep mopping the floor. I'm not looking for a fight. My work speaks for itself. Don't risk the company for my title." At the same time, Vale Airtech, a bitter competitor, seized the opportunity. They leaked a story. Vale Aero uses unauthorized labor staff to repair experimental aircraft. Well, the media firestorm intensified, fueled by anonymous quotes from disgruntled Vale engineers, likely paid by Airtech. The company's stock plummeted by 30%. The crisis was immediate and catastrophic. The board called an emergency meeting. They forced Catherine into a tight corner. She had two choices, delivered with brutal clarity: disavow the janitor publicly and fire him, or lose your position as CEO. You have 24 hours to prepare a statement. Catherine was cornered. She walked the fine line between the legacy her father built and the man who embodied its best principles. Her internal struggle was fierce. Was she a corporate survivor or a custodian of integrity? She looked at the photograph of her father and knew the answer. Her father valued the man, not the rank. She walked onto the press conference stage. The blinding flash of cameras made the room swim. She stared straight into the lens, calm, cool, and in control, her resolve steel. "Who fixed the MH92?" a reporter shouted over the din. Catherine smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first they had seen in years. A man who knew exactly what makes a machine fly and what makes it fall. A hero we tried to ignore. The reporters surged forward. "What is his name? Why is he just a janitor?" She paused for a beat, letting the tension build. "His name is Daniel Brooks, former Air Force chief engineer. He is the man who taught me that engineering isn't just a formula. It is faith. And today, I choose faith over fear." The room erupted. The move was bold, emotional, and completely unexpected. The board members watching on TV were apoplectic. But that night, the enemy struck back with maximum force. A damaging video was leaked across the internet. Internal, supposedly raw footage. It was subtly edited to show Daniel tampering with an engine, causing a small, controlled fire. The specific edit involved replacing a 7-second clip of Daniel tightening a bolt with footage of an engine backfire from a separate incident, making him look like a dangerous amateur. Catherine was crushed. Daniel was immediately suspended by the board's emergency committee. She was pilloried by the press for her complete lack of internal control and oversight and reckless favoritism. Mr. Thorne started circulating memos calling for her removal. She refused to be beaten. She knew the original repair was flawless. She began a desperate investigation, focusing on the company's compromised security cameras. She recognized the quality of the hack. It was a military-grade security bypass, far beyond the scope of a simple corporate spy. This was high-level, targeted espionage. Daniel, meanwhile, used his deep technical skills. He secretly worked on an old, decommissioned server drive, deep in the storage archives, using the hangar's darkest maintenance basement as his temporary war room. With surgical precision, he restored the original, unedited data. He didn't just restore the files. He used his forensic knowledge of military-grade encryption backdoors to bypass the AirTech shell, pulling the true timestamp and IP logs. The logs showed the intrusion originated from a dummy corporation known to be a front for Vail AirTech. The truth was devastating. The real video showed that an AirTech employee, disguised as an auditor, had attempted to sabotage the engine to make the MH92 look flawed. It was a planned, malicious act of corporate espionage, executed just hours before Daniel performed his original, life-saving adjustment. Daniel hadn't just fixed the jam, he had unknowingly corrected the initial sabotage attempt. Catherine took the evidence. She submitted the restored video, the timestamps, the IP logs, and the confession of malicious intent to the police. She issued a public, unyielding statement that included the technical evidence, revealing the full extent of AirTech's criminal deception. The competitor was arrested for industrial sabotage and market manipulation. The reputation of Vail Aero and Daniel Brooks was not just restored, but elevated, this time publicly and proudly. The board was silenced, forced to concede to the CEO who chose integrity over caution. The final monument to this battle was a simple, profound photograph. Catherine and Daniel standing together in front of the MH92 with a new massive hangar banner unfurled above them. Its slogan was clear: "Truth flies higher." That image was soon hung in the corporate lobby, right above the time clock. The storm passed. Daniel Brooks was immediately offered his old life back, and much more. He was given the official title of Chief Technical Advisor, Integrity and Field Operations, a position of immense authority, reporting directly to the CEO. He was given a salary that recognized his unique, priceless expertise. He politely refused the corner office. He still preferred to work on the hangar floor, the scent of oil and metal his preferred cologne. Sophie was always near him, safe in a cordoned-off play area, her red blocks contrasting brightly with the steel floor. He installed a small, framed photo of Flight 214's pilot on his simple desk, a silent reminder of his mission. Catherine visited him every single morning. Together, they would review the flight checklist, meticulously inspecting every bolt before a new test flight. It was a ritual now, a shared act of trust. Their professional dynamic evolved from suspicion to a symbiotic partnership. She relied on his ground truth. He relied on her ability to navigate the corporate stratosphere. One morning, Catherine found Daniel struggling with a complex diagnostic readout, muttering about over-reliance on digital interpretation. She didn't offer a quick solution. Instead, she sat beside him and used her knowledge of programming logic to debug the diagnostic software itself, proving that the machine's failure wasn't mechanical, but a software glitch triggered by a specific atmospheric pressure change. "You fixed the hand, I fixed the brain," she said, a playful challenge in her voice. He smiled, a humble, genuine smile that crinkled his eyes. "We fly better together, Ms. Vale." She started to realize she was laughing more easily, a spontaneous sound she hadn't produced since her father's passing. The cold armor around her heart was dissolving. She began to wear less formal suits, trading the corporate navy for lighter colors that reflected her newfound openness. Sophie, always the intuitive child, brought Catherine a small buttered pastry one morning. "You're like the mom in the stories Dad tells me," she announced simply. Catherine knelt down. She hugged the girl tight, tears stinging her eyes. It was the deepest compliment she had ever received. Sophie had the gift of seeing Daniel's heart, and now she saw Catherine's. One afternoon, Daniel was showing Sophie how a rotor blade works. Catherine approached. Sophie, holding a tiny wooden propeller, asked Catherine, "Why does this want to go up?" Catherine, instead of giving a dry physics lecture, explained the principle of lift as the plane's desire to hug the sky. Daniel looked at her, impressed. She was integrating feeling into science just as he did. The new MH-92, incorporating Daniel's overlooked safety protocols, now standard practice, was cleared for its maiden test flight. Catherine, the CEO, climbed into the pilot's seat. Daniel watched from the ground control booth, a quiet knot of anxiety in his chest. The machine lifted off smoothly, silently. It was the perfect flight. When she landed safely, she stepped out, removing her helmet. Her face was radiant. "Daniel," she called out, her voice raw with emotion. "You fixed my fear. You gave me permission to trust the mechanics again, and in doing so, you gave me back the sky." He smiled. "No, Ms. Vale. You are the one who dared to fly again. I just swept the debris out of your way." A few months later, the two of them launched a new company program, Veteran Engineers. It was a revolutionary training and recruitment pipeline for former military personnel, ensuring their undervalued skills found a home in aviation. The program was unique. It emphasized intuition, field experience, and resourcefulness over purely academic credentials, a tribute to Daniel's own journey. He took a direct role in developing the curriculum, focusing on real-world diagnostics and human-machine interface trust. Catherine stood on the stage at the launch ceremony. "A janitor taught me a simple truth," she declared to the world. "When we value the forgotten hands, the sky becomes a much safer place. We are finally building a company where the only thing that matters is integrity. Our mission is to restore not just aircraft, but purpose." The final, deeply personal statement of their bond was subtle. A small brass plaque was hung on the door to the hangar. It read, "Brooks Hangar." Catherine hung it herself. There was no ceremony, only the three of them, Catherine, Daniel, and Sophie, standing beneath it in quiet satisfaction. It was their place. A year passed. Valero was not just recovered, it was celebrated. It was the only major firm with a dedicated, successful career restoration program for veterans. The first cohort of veteran engineers was proving to be the most reliable team in the company's history. They brought an unshakable sense of mission that the corporate team had lost. Daniel and Sophie moved into a small, simple house near the airfield. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Its walls were painted in a cheerful sky blue, adorned with Sophie's simple drawings of happy helicopters and smiling stick figures labeled Dédé and Ms. Catherine. In the mornings, Daniel brewed coffee. He sometimes caught himself whistling, a habit he thought he'd lost forever. Sophie showed him her latest drawing. "Daddy, I drew Ms. Catherine flying with you," she said, holding up a crayon picture of two stick figures in the cockpit. He chuckled, pulling her close. She flies much higher than I do, sweetie. She's the captain now. But she told me, Sophie insisted, her eyes wide. She said she only flies high because of you. She needs your anchor. Daniel felt a warmth spread through him. An anchor. He liked that description. He was the root, the grounding element that allowed her ambition to soar safely. That afternoon, Catherine came for a quiet visit. She brought Sophie a detailed miniature model of the MH-92, perfectly painted. "It's for you, Sophie," she said. "I named her Faith because that's what your dad gave me." The little girl hugged the model tight, her attention captured. "Will you stay and play? We have cookies and a swing set." Catherine looked up. She didn't look at the house or the planes. She looked only at Daniel. She smiled, a soft, inviting expression that held a promise. "If I'm invited," she replied quietly, "I will stay. I could use a little grounding today." They sat on the porch watching the late afternoon light settle over the runway. They spoke not of business, but of shared memories. Sophie's latest joke, Daniel's favorite Air Force story, Catherine's childhood fear of thunder. The barrier between CEO and janitor, between boss and employee, was long gone. They were simply Daniel, Catherine, and Sophie, a constellation held together by respect and shared sorrow. They watched a veteran engineer from the program taxi a small plane. Catherine turned to Daniel. "I tried to buy safety with money and protocols. You taught me safety is built with personal care and accountability. That's the legacy I want." Daniel nodded. "And the best engineers," he said, "are the ones who know how to clean up their own mess, literally and figuratively." The sound of the departing plane faded into the distance. It was the sound of a company that had found its soul. Daniel looked past them to the vast expanse of the hangar, the afternoon light glinting off the massive body of the MH-92. He could clearly read the motto painted there, "Truth flies higher." He took Sophie's hand, placing it gently in Catherine's. He spoke only to her, his voice low and certain. "Family isn't where you were born. It's where you choose to be and choose again every single day. And I choose this." If you believe that stories that heal, that champion quiet integrity, and that honor the value of every human hand deserve to be told, please leave a comment and subscribe to Strong Dad Stories. We tell the tales that should never be forgotten.